In 1873, a nameless man was put up for sale at a Montana County auction for just $5. He looked like a broken laborer, wearing rags with his face hidden behind a bandana. But what no one at that auction knew was that 18 months earlier, that same man had been worth over $50,000, ran a ranch the size of a county, and owned half the town. He had been betrayed, robbed, and left with nothing. And the man who stole his life was standing right there in the crowd, waiting to buy him cheap. What the trader didn't expect was that a young cowgirl with only $5 in her pocket was about to place her bid first. This is the story of how a $5 purchase unleashed one of the quietest and most unexpected revenge stories of the Old West. Opal Calloway had not come to the auction for a man. She had come to look at a brown heifer and to trade 2 sacks of dried beans for coffee and twine. She was 23, the last of her family in the valley, and she ran 80 acres half-claimed under the new act with a barn that leaned to the east and a vegetable patch that produced just enough for one person and a little extra. The bidding had moved along before the man came up, a broken plow, a wagon missing a wheel, a milk cow with the bad quarter. Smoke from the morning fires hung over the courthouse square. The smell of wet pine drifted down from the hills. None of it had been Opal's business. She had stood near the back of the crowd with her hands in her pockets, listening. Then the sheriff brought him up. He was taller than the rest of the men on the platform. The coat he wore had been cut down to a sack and did not fit him. His hands, when the sheriff let go of his arm, hung at his sides. He did not lift his head, and he did not speak. Opal could see only the upper half of his face. What she could see were his eyes, and the shape they made when the cattle buyer called out 20. The livery owner said 25, and the man in the sheepskin coat said 35. The shape was not the shape of a broken man. It was the shape of a man who had decided, somewhere back along the line, that the safest thing he could do was to go quiet and stay small. The auctioneer leaned down. "Going once," he said. "Going twice." Sold to the young woman in the brown hat for $5. The crowd parted. The cattle buyer, a man named Hollis, called after her, "Ma'am, you bought yourself a busted brand. Best return him to the sheriff before the law asks questions." Opal did not turn around. The sheriff handed her a paper and a length of rope, more from habit than from cruelty, and she took both. The man walked beside her. He did not speak, and he did not pull against the rope. When they reached the buckboard, she untied the rope and folded it on the seat beside her. She pointed at the flatbed. He climbed up without being told. She climbed up after, took the reins, and turned the horse toward the road that led out of town. The horse was named Reuben, a 13-year-old bay with a white star, and he walked the road at the steady pace of an animal who had done the route before. The road was clay where it was not stone, and the ruts from other wagons were deep enough to rattle the buckboard frame. Opal let Reuben pick his own line. That was the first act of their bargain. It was also the act the rest of Cedar Ridge would not let her forget, no matter how long she lived there, or how long he stayed. The cabin was 2 rooms and a porch, sitting on a rise at the back of the claim, with the river about a 1/4 mile to the west. The woodpile was half what it should have been for winter. The smokehouse was empty. The henhouse needed mending on the south side. Opal had been putting the work off all summer because there had been no one to put to it. When the buckboard pulled in, the man did not move to get down. He sat on the flatbed, hands in his lap, looking at the porch as if it were a sentence he could not read. Opal climbed down, tied Reuben to the post, and walked to the cabin door. She did not look back. She opened the door and set the coffee pot on the stove. When she turned, he was on the ground, waiting. She made coffee and cornbread. She set his plate at the chair across from her own, and she sat and she ate. She did not ask him to sit. She did not explain the food. She only ate. After a while, he sat. He ate the way a man eats when he is not sure when he will be allowed to eat again. He did not look at her. He did not speak. When the plate was empty, he set the fork down so gently that the metal did not make a sound on the wood. That was the first supper of their arrangement, and there was no conversation in it worth repeating. He slept on the porch that night. She gave him a Hudson's Bay blanket and a folded piece of canvas for underneath and a saddle for a pillow, because the cabin had only the one cot. He did not thank her in words. He took the blanket when she set it down, and that was the thanks. The old shepherd dog walked out and lay down near his feet. The man put his hand on the dog's head, and the dog sighed and stayed. In the morning, Opal found the wood box on the porch had been filled. He had gone down to the woodpile in the dark and carried armload after armload up the steps and stacked it square. When she stepped out, he was sitting on the step with the axe across his knees, the way a man sits when he has worked himself into something close to a calm. She did not say anything about the wood. She made coffee and cornbread, and the morning went on. He did not give her his name. She tried on the third day, sitting across the table with her hands around her cup. She said, "If there is anything you want to be called, you can tell me, even just a first name." He looked at her for a long moment, then looked at the table and said, in a voice that sounded like it had not been used in a long while, "Mr. will do." Opal nodded. Mr. it was then. He had the hands of a man who had worked with them. The palms were wide, the fingers thick, along the inside of his left wrist, where a watch fob would sit. The skin was paler in a strip about as wide as a band. He had not been a field hand all his life. He had been a man who had time to glance at a watch. He did the work she set, and the work that was obvious, and the work she had not yet noticed needed doing. The third day, he mended the hen house. The fourth, he found a leak in the roof she had been putting off. The fifth, he came back from the river with 2 buckets of fish. On the morning of the 6th day, Opal woke to Reuben being saddled. She came out on the porch in her boots and her coat, and Mr. was in the yard with 1 foot in the stirrup, the way a man stands when he has decided to leave, but has not yet kicked the horse forward. The dog was sitting beside him, looking up as if waiting for permission to follow. Opal did not shout or run. She walked across the yard until she had to be looked at, and she said, "You are not on that horse." He did not move. She said, "The sheriff's paper says, I have you for a year, and I have not sold you, and I have not given you away. And if you ride out of here now, I will follow you to the county line and bring you back by the ear if I have to." He got down from the saddle without a word. He led Reuben to the post. untied him, and went back to the woodpile. Opal went inside and made coffee and cornbread, and the morning went on. And that was the morning she understood that whatever bargain she had made at the courthouse on September the 14th was not a thing she would be allowed to walk away from. By Sunday, the town had made up its mind. Beth had come to the dry goods store and told Opal that her mother would not have done it. The hardware man had asked, in the careful voice of a man who did not want to be quoted, whether the fellow at her place was dangerous. 3 different versions of the same story had reached the livery by closing time, and not one of them had a young woman riding a 13-year-old bay with a paper of needles and a quarter less to her name. The 3rd Sunday after the auction, Hollis came to the cabin himself. He came on a black horse, with 1 man behind him, and he did not knock. He came up the porch steps and stood on the boards and looked out across the yard. Mr. was at the woodpile. He had an axe in his hand. He set it down when he saw the stranger and walked to the corner of the porch, the way a man stands when he is measuring how many steps it would take to close a distance. Hollis did not look at Mr. He looked at Opal. He said, "I will give you $40 for the man and the trouble of him. I will give you $60 if you take the cash this morning and I take him now." He said, "You do not know what you have, and I do, and I am trying to do you a favor, miss." Opal was on the porch step with a tin of buttons in her lap. She did not look up. She said, "Mr. Hollis, the sheriff's paper says I have him for a year, and I have not sold him, and I have not given him away, and $40 or $60 does not change either of those 2 things." Hollis looked at her. Then he looked at Mr. Then he looked at her again. He said, "You are making a mistake." He said, "What you have there is a man without a name, and the people who do not have a name in this country do not have a name for a reason. And the reason is usually one of 3 things, and none of them are good." Mr. did not move. He stood at the corner of the porch with the axe, and he watched Hollis the way a man watches a snake he has seen before. The dog got up and walked to the porch steps and stood in front of Opal, growling, which was something she had not heard the old shepherd do in 2 years. Hollis said, "Miss, I am going to ask you once. The price is $60. I have it in my coat. The horse is tied, and we can be done in 10 minutes. Opal sorted a button. She said, "Mr. Hollis, the answer is no, and the answer will be no tomorrow, and it will be no on the day the paper runs out. And if you cannot take no, you are welcome to ride back to town and tell your wife at supper that you spent your Saturday at a widow's cabin, trying to take a man she bought fair and square." Hollis looked at her a long time. Then he walked to the horse and climbed up and rode out of the yard without another word, his man following. The dust from the horses hung in the road behind them after they were out of sight. Mr. set the axe against the wall. He stood where he was and looked at Opal, and for the first time since the auction, he looked at her with something in his face that was not the look of a man going quiet and staying small. It was the look of a man who had understood in the moment the offer was made that the woman who had refused it had just refused, on his behalf, the largest sum of money anyone had offered anyone in that yard in years. He did not say thank you. He picked the axe back up and went down to the woodpile, and the morning went on, and the dog lay down at Opal's feet, and the dust on the road settled, and Cedar Ridge would have something new to talk about by Sunday, and what they talked about would not be the truth, and what they talked about would not matter. And the work went on. The fever came on the last week of October. The nights on the porch had begun to bite, and Mr. had refused a second blanket, and refused the cot, and refused the offer to sleep on the floor in front of the fire. And so, when the cough started, it had somewhere to go, and it went. He did not say he was sick. He worked through the morning of the second day, split wood, walked to the river. By afternoon, the dog was following him from place to place, and by supper time, the coffee cup shook in his hand. She put the back of her hand to his forehead, the way her mother had done for her when she was small, and she said, "You are coming inside." He said, "I am fine." She said, "You are coming inside." She set the cot by the fire, brought him water, a rag, and a small bottle of willow bark tincture her mother had kept in the cupboard for 20 years. He sat on the cot and did not argue. The fever was high enough that arguing was no longer a thing he had the air for. The fever climbed through the night. Around 2 in the morning, he started talking, in the low, even voice of a man who believes he is alone. He said, "Clara." He said, "Do not ride out today, Clara. The river is high." He said, "Wait for me." Opal sat in the chair and listened. Whoever Clara was, she had been gone long enough that his voice had settled into the way he said her name. In the morning, the fever broke. The bandana had come loose in the night, and Opal saw, for the first time, the lower half of his face. There was a scar from the corner of his mouth to the hinge of his jaw, white and clean, the kind a man gets when a knife goes in deep. His mouth was set, his teeth were good, his chin was strong. He looked up at her and saw that she was looking, and he did not cover it. She did not ask about the scar. She went and made the coffee and the cornbread, and she brought him a bowl of broth she had made the night before, and she sat across from him at the table and waited. He said his name was Silas Whitlock. He had a ranch in the high country, a place called Tall Pine, with a real name on the gate, and the name was his. He had a wife. Her name was Clara. She was the one he had been talking to in the night. She was dead. He was the one who buried her. His partner, a man named Hollister, had handled the books for 6 years. The morning after the funeral, Hollister came to the kitchen table with a paper for him to sign. The paper said he was selling Hollister the ranch for $1 and other good considerations. He signed it because he had not slept, and because a man who has buried his wife that morning does not read the small print. 3 days later, the paper was entered at the courthouse. A second paper was entered with it, saying he owed Hollister $4,000 in unsecured debt. A third paper said he had been judged in absentia and was being sold for a year to cover the debt. The $50,000 he had when he walked out of that courthouse was now Hollister's. His name was on a bill of sale, and his face was the only part of him that was still his. He did not say this with heat. He said it the way a man says a thing he has had to repeat to himself to believe. He looked at her across the table. He said, "You should send me back." Hollister does not let a thing like this lie, and if he finds out where I am, he will come. And when he comes, you do not want to be in his way. He said, "You bought a broken thing, ma'am, and the broken thing is going to cost you more than $5. And that is a debt I cannot let you carry." Opal set her cup down. She said, "Mister, I have carried more than $5 worth of trouble since I was 16. And the one thing I have learned about a man who would forge papers and steal a ranch from a man whose wife had just been buried is that you do not make him smaller by running. You make him smaller by standing." He did not answer. He drank the broth. The dog came in from the porch and lay down by the cot. The fire burned low. The rain began to come down on the roof, and the cabin was warm, and neither of them spoke again for a long time, and the bargain she had made at the courthouse had changed again into a thing neither of them could put a price on. The first snow came on the 2nd of November, 3 weeks early. It started as rain, hard and warm. By mid-afternoon, the temperature had dropped, and the rain had turned to sleet, and the sleet to a snow that came down in sheets, the way the high country decides to be done with autumn. Opal was at the kitchen window when the first pop came out of the wood. She went out onto the porch. The sound had come from the barn lot, and the snow was so thick she could not see what had happened. She called Mister, and when he came up from the river path, the two of them walked down to the lot with a lantern. A cottonwood, the oldest in the stand along the fence, had come down across the corner of the barn. The roof beam under it was cracked. The 2-year-old heifer, the one she had been waiting all year to see fattened out, was in the lean-to behind the barn, and the lean-to was half-pinned. Mister did not ask what to do. He set the lantern down and started pulling boards off with his hands. Opal got the axe, the saw, and the rope from the buckboard. The two of them worked in the snow for the better part of an hour, and the heifer came out at the end of it, dazed and limping, but standing. He did not say anything when it was done. He stood in the snow and looked at the heifer, then the barn, then the fence line. The look of a man doing a calculation he had not been asked to do. The way a rancher sees a fence line that is not where it ought to be and cannot help himself. He said, "If you have a hammer and a handful of nails, I can pin the lean-to corner before the wet gets in." She said, "Second shelf, behind the crocks." He went. It was past dark when they came back to the cabin. They had hung a tarp over the lean-to, pulled the heifer in, fed her and the chickens. Opal set the coffee pot on the stove and the plates on the table, and they ate in silence. When the coffee was gone, she reached across the table to take his cup, and her hand touched his, and he did not pull away, and the touch lasted longer than either of them had expected. She took the cup. The fire popped. The snow came down. The dog sighed. On the morning of the 3rd of November, the stranger came. Opal was outside splitting kindling with the axe that Mister had been using to keep the woodbox full. She heard hooves on the road before she saw the horse, and when she looked up, a man in a good coat was riding a gray mare up the rise. Behind him, at a careful distance, was a second rider with a long coat and a watch chain across the front. The first man reined in. He had a face washed that morning in a hotel basin and a hat that had not seen weather. He said, "Good morning, ma'am," and she said, "Good morning." He said, "I am Mr. Lyle, looking for a man named Silas Whitlock, told he may be in this part of the country, specifically this claim." Opal set the axe down. She said, "Who is asking?" The man in the good coat said, "The man asking is Mr. Lyle, of Lyle and Lyle out of Helena, and the man sending me is a man interested in the same property Mr. Whitlock was interested in, and he would very much like to know where Mr. Whitlock is before the snow closes the roads." Opal said, "I do not know anyone by that name." The man looked at her the way a man looks at a person who has just said a thing he does not believe. Then at the cabin, then at the woodpile. The look of a man beginning to suspect that what he has been told is not the full of it. He said, "Ma'am, I will be in Cedar Ridge at the hotel for the next 4 days, and the man sending me has asked me to extend a courtesy, and the courtesy is $1,000 in cash, paid to any person who can give the address of Mr. Silas Whitlock. $1,000 is $1,000, ma'am, and I will be in Cedar Ridge for 4 days, and the snow is going to be here for longer than that." He touched the brim of his hat, turned the gray mare, and rode back down the rise. The second rider followed at the same careful distance. Opal stood in the yard with the axe in her hand and the snow on her shoulder and the dog at her side, and she watched them go. She did not call Mr. because Mr. was in the barn. The door was open just enough that she could see him, and he was standing very still, with the curry comb in his hand, and the heifer was standing next to him, and he had heard every word. That night, after the dishes were done, Silas said, "I will leave in the morning." Opal did not look up. She said, "I heard you." He said, "The man in the good coat will be back, and the man who sent him will send more. And the men who come next will not be wearing a good coat." He said, "The bargain was made on a different morning, when the man in the good coat did not know where to look, and he knows now." Opal set the rag down. She said, "Silas, you are not leaving in the morning." He said, "Ma'am, I am not a man you can keep by a paper. The paper says, 'I am your bonded laborer for a year.' And the paper is the kind a man can tear up, and I will tear it up myself if you let me. Because the man who is coming is the kind who does not stop at a sheriff's paper, and he will not stop at a widow's cabin." He said, "My wife is dead, and the man who killed her is alive, and his name is Thomas Hollister, and he is the man who signed the paper that took my ranch. And he is the man who put me in the auction in Cedar Ridge, and he is the man who had my wife on the trail between the cabin and the high meadow on the morning she died. And the men who did it are the men who said it was me. And the man on the bench at the hearing was his cousin. He said, I had decided to be the kind who lets a man come looking for him, because that is the kind who keeps his hands clean." He said, "And then I sat on your porch, and you fed me, and you put me inside when I was sick, and you told the cattle buyer no at 60, the same way you told him no at 40, and I have been trying to decide if I am still allowed to walk away from that, and the answer is no." Opal set her hands flat on the table. She said, "In the morning, before the man in the good coat comes back, you and I ride to the sheriff, and the sheriff takes a letter, and the letter goes to the United States Marshal in Helena, and the marshal is the man who sorts out who signed what and who killed whom, and $1,000 is small money when the United States is also asking questions." She said, "You are not leaving in the morning, and the reason is that the man who killed your wife does not get to be the reason you do not have a home. He did not speak for a long time. The fire popped. The snow came down outside. The dog lifted his head and set it back down. In the morning, the buckboard was careful, and the road to Cedar Ridge was the kind of road a careful buckboard could make in 2 hours. The sheriff was at the courthouse. The letter was written. The letter was sent. The man in the good coat was told by the sheriff, in the voice of a man who had been told a thing by a man from the United States Marshal, that his hotel bill was the only thing the territory was going to be paying for him, and that the territory would prefer he take the next coach south. The marshal came 5 weeks later with 2 deputies and a writ that set aside the second paper and the third paper and the judgment in absentia. Silas Whitlock's name, which had been on a bill of sale in Cedar Ridge for 8 months, was his name again. The ranch in Tall Pine was his ranch again. The $50,000, which had been in the hands of a man named Thomas Hollister, was a thing the marshal was going to be asking Mr. Hollister about. On the morning the marshal left, Opal was on the porch with the coffee, and Silas was on the step below her, and the dog was at their feet, and the snow had melted, and the mud had come, and the cottonwood was down, and the heifer was out on the new spring grass. Silas said, "Ma'am, I would like to say something." Opal said, "You may." He said, "My name is Silas Whitlock. I have a ranch in the high country, and the ranch is mine, and my name is mine," he said. The man who walked off this porch in the snow was broken. The man on this step is not, and the woman on the porch is the reason. Opal did not answer for a long time. She said, "Silas, I have a counter question." He said, "Ma'am." She said, "The man in the good coat, when he comes back, where will you be?" He said, "I will be on this step. The woman on the porch will be on the porch, the dog at our feet, and the answer to the question is the question." It was a Sunday in late April, 1874. The snow was gone, the river was down, and the heifer was a cow now, out on the new grass, with a calf at her side that had been born in the night and was already standing. Silas had rebuilt the cabin over the winter, with a second room, a porch that wrapped to the south, a stone chimney, and a barn that no longer leaned. He had done the work the way he had done it all winter, with the same steady hands and the same look of a man who had put himself back together the only way a man can, by the work, in the place, with the people who are still standing at the last nail. He had gone back to Tall Pine twice, with Opal, in the spring and in the fall, to settle the business of the ranch and to set a foreman in place. The ranch ran. The $50,000 sat in a bank in Helena under both their names because Opal had insisted, and because Silas had understood that arguing with her about it was the kind of thing a man did once and did not do again. Hollis had stopped riding out to the cabin. Beth had come by in March with a jar of quince preserves and had not stayed long, and the visit had been the kind that is not about the preserves, and the afternoon had been a quiet one. They were not married. What I can tell you is what the porch looked like on that Sunday. The porch looked like the porch of 2 people who had decided a thing was a thing. The coffee was on the stove, the dog on the rug, the wood box full, the new calf in the barn, The road to Cedar Ridge was a road Opal drove twice a week, in a buckboard with new tires Silas had bought with money he did not apologize for, and Opal had let him, because letting him was the kind of thing a woman does when the man has earned the right to be let. Silas came out with 2 cups. He had stopped wearing the bandana, and the scar was not a thing he hid. He handed Opal her cup, and her hand did not touch his, because they had moved past the place where a touch was a thing to be surprised about. He sat on the step. She sat in the chair. The dog sighed. The coffee was good. He said, "I have been thinking about the 80 acres. A man in Cedar Ridge has been wanting the South 40 for 2 years, and the price would let us put in the irrigation ditch it has been needing since the year before you were born." She said, "I am not selling the South 40. She said, "The South 40 is the place the calf was born this morning and the place the porch looks out over, and it is not for sale at any price that includes the word fair." He said, "The South 40 has never been for sale, and the only reason I asked is because I wanted to hear you say it." The morning went on. The man on the step was not the man who had been sold at the auction in September, and the woman on the porch was not the woman who had bought him, and the dog was the same dog, and the bargain was a thing that did not have a name and did not need one. The name it would have been given was the kind a man says out loud only once in his life, and the once was that morning, on the step, in the sun, with the dog at their feet, and the woman did not say it back, and the man did not need her to, and the morning was enough. If you rode with us to the end, thank you. Stories like this one are about what happens when one person decides on a Tuesday morning in the rain that another person is worth more than the price that has been put on them and acts on it. If this is your kind of story, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done in Opal's place. Would you have bid the $5? Would you have brought him home? Would you have told the cattle buyer no at 60 the same way you told him no at 40? I read everyone, and I will be in the replies. We will see you in the next one. Until then, take care of the people who are worth more than the price that has been put on them. They are usually closer than you think.